The Gift Beneath the Ashes genre. Inspirational fiction / allegorical drama dedication to all those who have ever felt broken, lost, or forgotten. May you find the seeds of hope that grow even in the darkest soil. Authors note this story was born from the belief that love, in its purest form, has the power to redeem, transform, and bring life where there seems to be none. It is a tribute to resilience, compassion, and the quiet courage that ignites change. Table of Contents Prologue Part I. The Darkness Before Dawn Chapter 1, The Burned City Chapter 2, The Street Collector Chapter 3, The Hidden Library Chapter 4, The Stranger's Arrival Chapter 5, The Offer Chapter 6, Seeds in the Dust Chapter 7, The Law of the City Chapter 8, The Arrest Part II, The Gift Chapter 9, The Trial Chapter 10, The Crowd's Choice Chapter 11, The Execution Chapter 12, The Storm Chapter 13, The Bloom Chapter 14, The Memory Chapter 15, The Awakening Chapter 16, The Rebellion of Light Part III, The Living Gift Chapter 17, The Garden Rising Chapter 18, The Return of the Seed Bearers. Chapter 19, The Festival of Renewal Chapter 20, The Mirror Moment Chapter 21, The Wounds Remembered Chapter 22, The Whisper in the Garden Chapter 23, The Passing of the Torch Chapter 24, The Eternal Bloom. Prologue. The silence after fire. The city had forgotten how to breathe. Avaris lay smothered beneath a slow-moving sky, gray and heavy with memory. Once, its skyline had shimmered with towers of glass and faith, but the fires of war had swallowed them whole. Now the air trembled with the ghost of that burning, a taste of iron and smoke that clung to every heartbeat. No one spoke of how it began. Wars never begin where people think they do. They start quietly, in hearts that stop believing in one another, in words that grow sharp, in love that cools to ash. And by the time the sky was torn open and the streets caught flame, it was too late to remember what forgiveness even meant. What remained was a city of survivors who mistook endurance for life. They built walls not only around their homes, but around their hearts. Hope became a heresy whispered only by those too young to understand fear. Joy was traded for rations, laughter for obedience. The wind that drifted through Avaris was dry and thin, carrying the faint clatter of rusted metal, the sound of memory decaying. Every step on the cracked pavement echoed like a confession. No birds dared to cross the sky, their wings had long since found safer heavens. Even the rain, when it came, smelled of sorrow and ash. At night, the city did not sleep, it endured. The darkness pulsed with distant machinery, and the low hum of watchtowers sweeping their light across empty courtyards. From above, Avaris might have looked like a heart still beating, but one that had forgotten why. Yet beneath the ruin, the earth waited. The soil, though poisoned by smoke and tears, remembered what life felt like. Deep in its hidden veins, roots that had long been severed still dreamed of green. On the outskirts stood a single tree, blackened, leafless, and impossibly alive. Its bark was charred to glass, its trunk twisted by heat, but its shape reached upward, stubborn as prayer. They called it the witness tree, the last of its kind. Children dared each other to touch it, though no one stayed long beneath its shadow. The elders said it carried the guilt of every soul lost in the fire. Others said it was watching, waiting for something or someone to break the curse. The city's rulers, a council of iron hearts, forbade talk of renewal. They decreed that nothing should grow again, for growth bred dreams, and dreams bred rebellion. Gardens were raised. Books that spoke of mercy or love were hidden or burned. Compassion was branded weakness. Order was the only God left. Still, in the cracks of the city's silence, life whispered. It spoke through the laughter of children who didn't yet know the rules of despair. It breathed through the sigh of an old woman who still lit a candle. Before sleeping, though no gods were allowed, it trembled in the heartbeat of those who remembered what kindness felt like, even if they no longer believed it possible. And somewhere among the broken walls and forgotten streets, a young scavenger walked. His name was Lior, though few cared to ask it. He carried a satchel patched with pieces of old cloth, filled with things others had thrown away, trinkets, torn letters, a pocket watch that had stopped long before he was born. He traded memories for food, not because they had worth, but because some still needed to remember. He didn't know why he kept certain things, or why sometimes, when the wind shifted, he felt something like longing, a pain that wasn't hunger, a silence that wasn't empty. And on that particular evening, as the dying light brushed the ruins in a color that almost looked like gold, Lior paused. Beneath his feet, the ashes stirred. He didn't see it, but somewhere deep below the surface, a seed turned in its sleep. Chapter 1. The burned city morning crept over Avaris like a wounded animal, hesitant, limping, unsure if it should show its face again. The dawn sky was the color of smoke-stained linen. The sun, when it broke through, did not rise. It bled, a muted, trembling glow that filtered through the ruins as though ashamed to look directly upon what remained of the city. Once, Avaris had been a place of music. The streets were said to have sung with vendors' laughter, and children chased the scent of bread along the cobbled alleys. That memory was a ghost now, lingering in the cracks of charred walls, in the echo of steps that went nowhere. Lior woke to the sound of metal against metal, a gate being drawn, the city stirring into its daily survival. He sat up on the floor of what had once been a library. Shelves still stood like skeletons, books long devoured by fire or taken for kindling. A thin layer of ash covered the floor, glimmering faintly when the light slipped through the shattered dome. He wrapped a gray scarf around his mouth and stepped outside. The cold bit like teeth. The streets were rivers of dust. People moved silently, eyes lowered, faces pale from hunger and fear. Posters fluttered on every wall, reminders that hope breeds disobedience and order keeps you alive. The faces of the council stared from every corner, expressionless masks of authority, polished smooth by years of reverence and resentment. Lior joined the slow-moving crowd toward the market. The air smelled of burnt metal and oil, a smell that had become the scent of life itself. The market was a hollow imitation of what it once was. Makeshift stalls leaned like tired men. The goods were scraps, salvaged from ruins, wires, broken lenses, bits of copper, rags, spoons without handles. Trade was done in silence. Too many words had gotten people arrested. Lior's satchel swung at his side, filled with small fragments of yesterday, a cracked marble, a fragment of a mirror, an old key. Worthless things, the traders called them. But to Lior, each object was a heartbeat trapped in time. He collected what others discarded, not because he hoped to sell them, but because he couldn't bear to let them be forgotten. He stopped at a corner stall, where a man with soot-lined eyes examined the chipped mug he offered. The handle, shaped like a heart, caught a glint of dull light. "Too sentimental," the man grunted. "No use for that here." Lior said nothing. He tucked the mug back carefully into his bag and walked on. The crowd parted as a patrol passed, armored guards in black suits, their visors reflecting the city like dark mirrors. Behind them rumbled a drone, scanning the streets with a red beam. Every few moments, a mechanical voice blared from its speaker. "Order is peace. Emotion is danger. Report all gatherings. Report all hope." The words fell like rain no one wanted. Lior turned into an alley, narrow and half-collapsed. The air there was thick with the scent of rust and damp stone. He stopped before a wall covered in faded graffiti, swirls of color half hidden beneath soot. There, faint but legible, someone had written a forbidden word in charcoal. "Love." He traced the letters with his fingers. The ash smeared, staining his skin, but he didn't care. The word felt alive, like a secret heartbeat. Then a sound, a cough behind him. An old woman sat near the corner, wrapped in a patchwork shawl that shimmered faintly in the gray light. Before her, a small flame flickered in a tin can. Fire was forbidden without permit, but she tended it like one tends a sacred memory. "Careful," she murmured without looking up. "They see everything." Lior froze. "You shouldn't light that." She smiled, a soft, wrinkled smile that carried no fear. "Fire remembers warmth even when the world forgets." Her words unsettled him. He wanted to walk away. But his feet didn't obey. "You'll be punished." "Perhaps," she said, "but if I do not light it, the cold wins twice, once outside, once inside." The wind picked up, scattering ash around them. The tiny flame trembled but did not die. She lifted her eyes to him then, clear, luminous, too alive for Avaris. "What do you carry in that bag, wanderer?" He hesitated. "Things that once mattered." "Ah," she whispered, her smile deepening. "Then you carry more than most." Her voice seemed to sink beneath his skin. He turned away abruptly, afraid of what he might feel if he stayed. Feelings were dangerous here. They led to questions, and questions led to disappearance. The sound of a drone passed overhead, and by the time he looked back, the woman was gone. Only the faint glow of her flame remained, a heartbeat against the cold. He moved toward the city square, where the statue of the council rose like a monument to fear. 5 faceless figures in iron stood holding chains that stretched outward, binding invisible captives. Beneath them, in bold engraving, were the words, "Love is weakness." But someone at great risk had scratched beneath it in small letters, "Weakness is what makes us human." Lior felt something stir, not rebellion, not yet, but a strange ache that refused to be named. He left the square and walked north toward the wall. Beyond it lay the wasteland's forbidden ground. It was said that nothing lived there, that the soil itself had been poisoned. But sometimes, in the dead of night, Lior dreamed of crossing it. In those dreams, he heard something calling not in words, but in silence, like a forgotten melody. At the northern gate, he sat on a broken crate, pulled out the heart-handled mug, and began to clean it with a rag. The motion was slow, almost reverent. In the reflection of the metal, he saw the faint shimmer of sky, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the clouds seemed less gray. A color he couldn't name flickered there, something between gold and hope. He blinked, and it was gone. From the corner of his eye, a figure slipping through a side passage, cloaked, quick. He thought he saw the flash of a ribbon like the one he carried in his satchel, the same shade of red. His pulse quickened. But before he could follow, a whistle split the air. "Curfew in 30 minutes, shouted a guard. Lior rose, clutching his bag, and made his way back through the labyrinth of ruins. The wind howled through broken windows, carrying whispers like the sighs of the dead. That night, he lay awake in the hollow library, staring at the fractured ceiling. The city outside groaned like a living thing in pain. And as he drifted toward uneasy sleep, he thought of the old woman's words, "Fire remembers warmth even when the world forgets." He dreamed of a tree that once bloomed by the river. Its branches glowed, its leaves whispered stories of love, and beneath its roots he saw something shining, something buried but still breathing. When he awoke, the first sound he heard was the faint, distant cry of a bird. No one had heard birds in Avaris for years. He sat up, heart trembling. Somewhere beyond the ash, dawn was remembering its name. Chapter 2. The street collector morning broke over Avaris without light. The sun rose behind the ash clouds, turning the sky into a dull bruise. It was a kind of half-day, neither dawn nor dusk, just an endless in-between. Lior moved through the slanted streets with the practiced stealth of one who knew every echo. He walked where others feared to linger, where buildings leaned like drunks, their faces scarred by fire and time. In this city, silence was safer than speech, and the art of survival lay in going unnoticed. He was called the street collector, not out of affection, but necessity. His hands were thin, his eyes quick, his gait wary. To live in Avaris was to barter not only for food, but for fragments of forgotten meaning. Lior's trade was in relics, the small things that no longer had value. A locket without a picture, a child's shoe, a rusted spoon, an empty glass vial that once held perfume. To others, they were junk. To him, they were voices. Each object carried a faint whisper of what once was. Sometimes, when he turned one over in his hands, he could almost hear laughter, music, or the hush of a name spoken in love. But he had long ago learned to smother such sounds. To feel too deeply was dangerous in a world where the heart was the most hunted organ. Today, he searched the northern district, the oldest and most decayed. Snow mixed with soot, forming a gray slush that clung to his boots. The smell of oil and rot hung heavy. From time to time, a drone passed overhead, scanning the alleys with its single red eye. At the corner of Hollow Street, he found what looked like the remains of a nursery. The walls were painted with faint murals of stars and birds, the kind that once watched over sleeping children. Most of the beds were overturned, but under a pile of dust and paper, Lior found a small wooden block carved with the letter L. He turned it in his fingers. Paint had peeled away, but something about it tugged at him, not because it bore the first letter of his name, but because of the strange warmth it carried. He slipped it into his satchel, feeling its weight settle like a heartbeat. A voice startled him. "You still looking for ghosts, collector?" It was Bran, a fellow scavenger, heavier, older, and crueler in spirit. His eyes flicked to Lior's bag. "You'll starve before you find anything worth selling." Lior shrugged. "Some things are worth more than food." Bran spat on the ground. "Not here, they're not. The only thing that buys bread in Avaris is obedience." He walked off, whistling a hollow tune. Lior watched him disappear into the mist and thought of the words carved above the council's gate. "Survival is purity." But he wondered, if survival was all that remained, why did everyone still look half dead? He moved on, climbing through the ruins of what had been the music hall. The roof had collapsed, and snow filtered down through the cracks like falling ashes. A broken piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and warped. On impulse, Lior brushed the dust away and pressed one key. The sound that emerged was faint but pure, a single note trembling in the cold air. For a moment he froze, as if afraid the city might punish the memory of music. But no one came. He pressed another key, then another. A melody began to form, broken, hesitant, yet hauntingly alive. It was a sound the city had not heard in years. For those few seconds, the ruins breathed again. He stopped only when he noticed a small figure in the doorway, a child, perhaps 8 years old, wrapped in torn blankets. She stared at him with eyes too large for her face. "Play more," she whispered. Lior hesitated. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she said simply. He almost smiled, but it felt foreign on his face. "Music is forbidden." "Then why did you play?" He didn't know how to answer. Maybe he'd played because silence was too heavy to bear that morning. Maybe because the note had felt like a pulse, proof that the city hadn't yet devoured everything human. Before he could respond, the wail of a siren shattered the fragile peace. The child vanished into the alleys like smoke. Lior grabbed his satchel and slipped through a broken window just as patrol boots thundered nearby. Outside, the streets were alive with shouts. A group of citizens had been caught hoarding bread. The guards were forcing them to kneel. Lior kept to the shadows, his breath shallow, heart pounding. He had seen this too many times, the cycle of fear, the ritual humiliation of the hungry. And yet, this time, something in him refused to look away. The eldest of the prisoners, a woman with streaks of white in her hair, met his gaze for a single instant. There was no plea in her eyes, only a strange calm, as though she saw something beyond the moment. When the guards struck her, the sound echoed through the street like thunder. Lior turned away, bile rising in his throat. He wanted to shout, to do something, but what could one man do in a city where compassion was treason? He walked for hours, trying to shake the image. It clung to him like ash. By evening, the city's artificial lamps buzzed to life, throwing pale light over cracked pavement. Lior found himself near the river, a black, sluggish vein cutting through the city's heart. It reeked of rust and decay. Yet as he stood there, he saw something strange, a single paper lantern drifting in the current. Its flame, small and defiant, danced against the dark water. Someone had lit it, though open flames were forbidden. It drifted silently past him, carrying a fragile light through the ruins. Lior watched it until it vanished under a bridge. In that moment, he realized that despite all the rules, all the fear, there were still those who dared to remember warmth. As night fell, snow began again, soft, relentless. He returned to the hollow library where he kept his collection hidden beneath loose floorboards. He emptied his satchel, the wooden block, the mug, a button shaped like a star, a broken compass. He arranged them carefully as though piecing together a puzzle no one else believed in. He touched each one, eyes distant. "What were you?" he whispered. "Who lost you?" No answer came, only the faint sigh of wind through broken windows. He lay back, wrapping himself in his thin blanket. His eyes lingered on the ceiling where cracks formed the shape of branches. Somewhere deep inside, beneath all the cynicism and hunger, he felt a pulse, a longing for something he couldn't name. Sleep came slowly, dragging him into dreams of the river glowing with light and of an unseen hand reaching through the darkness. When morning returned, gray and silent, he would rise again to walk the streets, trading the forgotten for survival. But tonight, even as the cold gnawed at his bones, he dreamed not of ash, but of flame. Chapter 3. The hidden library. The storm came without warning. By midday, the sky had turned to iron, and the air filled with a bitter chill that stung Lior's face as he crossed the northern quarter. Dust swirled through the streets like restless spirits. The city moaned under the weight of another gray day. He had gone farther than usual, chasing a rumor whispered by a dying trader, that beneath the ruins of the old archives lay tunnels untouched by the fires. Tunnels where the council's burn orders had never reached. To most, such a story was madness. To Lior, it was a spark too bright to ignore. He moved cautiously through the debris, past the crumbling facade of the grand archives. Once it had been Avaris's pride, a cathedral of knowledge, crowned with marble pillars and etched with inscriptions about truth and progress. Now it was a skeleton of stone, its windows shattered, its halls blackened by years of flame. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold and ash. Shelves stood like gravestones. He ran his fingers along them, leaving trails in the dust. Every so often, a fragment of burned paper fluttered by, words half visible before dissolving in the air, Mercy, forgiveness, love, he stopped. The last word hung in the air like a ghost. Love, he whispered it, barely daring to breathe. It felt forbidden even here in the ruins. A sound startled him, a shuffle of feet. He turned sharply, reaching for the small blade he kept hidden in his coat. Who's there? A pause, then a voice, soft and steady. Only what's left of what was once. An old woman emerged from the shadows, her shawl patched in colors long faded. Her eyes, though clouded with age, shone with an unsettling clarity. Lior recognized her instantly, the woman from the alley, the one who had tended the forbidden flame. You, he said, lowering the knife slightly. You follow me. Perhaps it's the other way around, she replied with a faint smile. Few come this far into the bones of the city. Fewer still come seeking what cannot be sold. Lior frowned. I'm not looking for trouble. Good, she said, walking past him. Then you'll find truth instead. Before he could speak, she pressed her palm against a section of the wall. A low rumble followed, and the stones shifted. A doorway appeared narrow, hidden, leading into darkness. Come, she said. You've been collecting fragments. Maybe it's time you met the whole. Something in her tone, neither command nor plea, drew him forward. He followed. The passage descended steeply, the air growing warmer as they went. Small oil lamps flickered along the walls, casting trembling halos of gold. The smell of dust gave way to something unexpected, old paper, ink, and faint traces of lavender. They entered a vast underground chamber. Books, thousands of them. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling, stacked with volumes of every size and color. Some were singed, others bound in strange, delicate fabrics. Candles glowed between the rows, lighting the place with an otherworldly calm. Lior stopped, speechless. Mara watched him with quiet amusement. You've been walking among the ashes so long, she said softly. Did you forget that the fire never wins everything it burns? He ran his hands along the nearest shelf, his fingers trembling. How is this possible? The council burned what it could see, she interrupted. But wisdom has its ways of hiding. Truth has roots that burrow deeper than fire can reach. He turned to her. Why risk this? They'd destroy you if they found out. Her eyes gleamed. They already tried. But what is there to destroy in one who has already given herself to remembrance? She moved to a wooden table near the center of the room. On it lay open books, each filled with words Lior had not seen in years: mercy, grace, compassion, forgiveness. She touched one gently. These, she said, are what they fear most, not weapons, not rebellion, but love that cannot be controlled. Lior looked around. You kept all this for what? For the day someone would come who still listens. Her gaze fixed on him, and for the first time in years he felt seen not as a scavenger or ghost, but as something still capable of meaning. I don't understand, he said. Love doesn't feed you. It doesn't keep you alive. Doesn't it? She asked. What do you think keeps your hands searching the ruins for the memories of strangers? Why do you keep pieces of a world that no longer wants to remember? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. Mara walked closer, her voice lowering. You've been gathering ashes and calling them survival, but deep inside you're waiting for fire, the kind that warms, not destroys. Her words struck something deep. He felt anger rise to shield the ache. You talk like the old books, like they mean something. But the world has changed. There's nothing left worth saving. She smiled sadly. Then why are you still breathing? The silence that followed was heavy and holy. She turned to a smaller alcove and pulled a book bound in dark leather. Its pages were fragile, but the ink was alive. She handed it to him. Take this, she said. It survived the first purge. Read it when the city feels too loud. You'll hear another voice beneath the noise. He hesitated. What's it about? Her eyes softened. It's about a love so stubborn that not even death could silence it. Lior looked down at the book. Its cover bore a single symbol, a tree with roots reaching downward, branches upward, as if touching both earth and sky. He brushed the dust away. Why give this to me? He asked quietly. Because, she said, you're not as lost as you think. He met her gaze, and for a brief instant the room seemed brighter, the candlelight catching something in her eyes that looked like dawn. When he left the hidden chamber hours later, the storm had cleared. The city above was still gray, still cold, but something within him had shifted. In his satchel, alongside the trinkets of the forgotten, rested the book, its presence humming softly, like a heartbeat against his side. As he walked home through the ashes, he found himself whispering Mara's words under his breath. Love is the one thing they can't burn. And for the first time, he wondered, what if she was right? Chapter 4. The stranger's arrival. The streets of Avaris had grown used to the gray. The city had long since surrendered to monotony. the silence of despair settling over it like ash. Life had become a rhythm of avoidance. Eyes lowered, steps careful, heart sealed. But that morning, something unusual threaded through the air, something small, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. Lior first noticed it from the ruins of the music hall, where he had been cataloging his collection of forgotten objects. A figure moved across the square beyond the council statue. At first, he thought it was a child, or perhaps a scavenger like himself. But the way this person walked, the calmness in each step, was unlike anyone he had seen. He paused, instinctively crouching behind the remnants of a collapsed wall. The figure was tall, thin, and carried nothing but a torn satchel. His eyes, when they caught the faint glimmer of sunlight through the ash, were the color of dawn breaking over winter hills, warm yet piercing, as if they had seen the world in its beginning and in its end and found both beautiful. No one else seemed to notice. The citizens moved past, their heads bowed, faces pale with fear and resignation. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, uncertain what to do with a presence so unafraid. Lior felt a tug he could not name. Curiosity, yes, but more than that, a vibration in the marrow of his bones, as if the city itself had whispered, "Watch him." The stranger stopped in the square near the fountain, once a monument of laughter and play, now a cracked basin filled with blackened water. He bent down and gently touched the surface. The ripples spread outward, moving with a grace that made the chaos of the city seem clumsy and rude. Lior studied him from the shadows. His movements were deliberate, patient, almost ritualistic, as if each small gesture carried weight beyond the moment. He did not seem afraid of the guards, drone, or the council's ever-watchful eyes. The stranger's gaze drifted toward the northern wall, where Lior had often dreamed of walking. He seemed to acknowledge the desolation without judgment, merely nodding it as one might note the passing of seasons. A small child stumbled into the square, kicking a tin can that clanged across the stones. The people nearby recoiled, ready to scold, to punish. But the stranger knelt. He extended a hand, not with impatience, but with reverence. The child hesitated, then placed her tiny fingers in his. A smile, hesitant yet radiant, blossomed across her face. Lior's chest tightened. He had seen children in Avaris before, hungry, silent, cautious, yet never had he seen one allowed such a moment without fear. The stranger straightened. His eyes swept the square, and for a moment they met Lior's from the shadows. That gaze was both invitation and challenge, a question Lior did not understand. He wanted to step forward to speak, but his instincts restrained him. Trust had been outlawed in this city long before he was born. The stranger rose and began to walk, slow and purposeful, through the ash-strewn streets. The wind seemed to follow him, carrying faint scents of pine and rain, of life untouched by smoke. Windows shuddered nervously as he passed, and shutters slammed in protest, but the man moved on undeterred. Lior found himself trailing, hidden among the ruins. He watched the stranger pause at a collapsed wall where wildflowers had stubbornly begun to push through the cracks. Kneeling, he pressed his fingers against the soil, not with hands of conquest, but hands of care. For a brief instant, the grayness around the flowers seemed less oppressive. Green pushed against gray with the faintest defiance. Lior's heart thrummed. What madness was this? In a city that outlawed hope, he was witnessing its quiet revival. The stranger continued, passing the northern gate and disappearing toward the alleys Lior had never dared enter. When he vanished from view, the city seemed duller, emptier, as if it had only allowed itself a momentary glimpse of possibility. That night, Lior could not sleep. The stranger's eyes haunted him not with fear, but with a pull he could not name. Questions he had long buried surfaced. Is it possible to care without demand? To give without expectation? To be alive without fear? He tried to return to his usual habits, cataloging the relics in his satchel, arranging them neatly beneath the floorboards. Yet each object felt smaller now, as if shadowed by the presence he had witnessed. The moon rose pale and thin, its light slicing through the ash clouds. Lior slipped to the city square once more, hopping for another glimpse. The fountain stood still, the blackened water reflecting only the gray sky. But the memory of the stranger lingered, as though it had seeped into the stones themselves. He remembered Mara's words from the hidden library. Love is the one thing they can't burn. And in the quiet of the night, he felt something he had not felt in years, a flicker of recognition. The stranger had come not to teach, not to warn, but simply to be. And in that being, he had planted a seed. One Lior could not yet see, but would feel in the marrow of his bones. The city slept around him unaware. The ash settled like a blanket over its wounds. And yet, somewhere beneath the rubble, life whispered, faint but insistent, as if answering a question the city had long refused to ask. Could hope return even here? Lior walked home slowly, the streets echoing with emptiness, yet resonating with the memory of what he had witnessed. And though he did not know the stranger's name, or why he had appeared, he understood some presences cannot be ignored. Some gifts arrive before the recipient is ready to recognize them. That night, for the first time in years, Lior allowed himself to dream, not of survival, not of ash, but of the possibility that life, in its stubborn insistence, might still bloom in a world that had forgotten how. Chapter 5. The offer the city was quieter than usual that morning. A gray fog had settled low over the streets, and the smell of ash and metal was sharper, more bitter, as though the world itself had drawn a warning breath. Lior walked along the river, the edges of his coat dusted with soot. His eyes kept scanning habitually for objects to claim: a broken trinket, a fragment of memory, anything worth preserving. He had seen the stranger the day before. His presence still lingered like a phantom across the square and the ruined alleys. He couldn't tell if it was the stranger himself or what he represented that haunted him. Hope. That word had been whispered by Mara, but Lior had long dismissed it as a dangerous memory. And yet today he could not stop thinking about it. The first sign came as a soft, uneven cry carried across the mist. A child. A small, frail voice wailing near the northern gate where the walls met the river. Lior hesitated. Normally, the cries of the young were ignored. Attention could be dangerous. But something in the tone of the child made his stomach tighten, a familiar echo of helplessness he had buried long ago. He turned the corner and saw a group of people standing around the child, ragged, fearful adults who stared at him as if he were a burden. The child's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood had begun to stain the dust beneath him. "Move along," someone muttered. "Let the guards handle it." "Or leave him to die," another whispered. And then Lior saw him. The stranger was kneeling beside the child, his hands bare, his sleeves rolled, touching the wound with a gentleness that seemed almost sacramental. There was no hesitation, no thought of consequence, only presence, intention, care. "Step back," the stranger said softly, looking at the crowd. "This is not your concern, it belongs to him alone." The people hesitated. Some looked down, shame pressing against their ribs, others scoffed openly. "What a fool," one man muttered. "A life for nothing, do you not see? In avarice, nothing is free." But the stranger ignored them. He tore a strip of cloth from his satchel, wet it in the river, and pressed it against the wound. He whispered something Lior could not hear, words that seemed to settle over the child like a cloak. The child's crying softened, then stopped entirely. The stranger lifted him gently, examining the leg with care and skill. Lior's chest throbbed. He had seen kindness before in glimpses and fleeting gestures. But this was deliberate, unwavering, almost defiant. It unsettled him, stirred something in him he had long thought dead. One of the onlookers, a woman with lines etched deep by hunger and fear, laughed bitterly. "He expects gratitude, foolishness. Do you not see how this city punishes those who give?" The stranger looked up at her. "I give nothing for thanks, I give because there is need. That is enough." The words were simple, but in the quiet of the foggy morning they rang louder than any decree of the council. Lior watched, hidden behind a broken wall, feeling both drawn and afraid. He wanted to step forward to speak, to intervene, yet something held him back, the careful, trained caution of survival. But his hands itched, his heart ached, and for the first time he felt like an observer of something larger than his own survival. The child whimpered, and the stranger smiled softly. "I cannot make you walk without pain, little one, but you can stand, and you can try." He lifted the child into his arms, careful and steady, and began walking toward the riverbank where a broken bridge led to safer ground. The crowd parted silently. Some frowned, some muttered, but none dared to stop him. When they had passed, the woman who had scoffed leaned forward. "Do you not see the danger?" she hissed. "The council will hear of this, they will punish him for defiance." "Perhaps," the stranger said without turning, "or perhaps they will witness what cannot be silenced." A cold wind swept through the square. The river reflected gray sky, yet Lior felt warmth in the air, a subtle pulse that seemed to echo the stranger's movements. He followed at a distance, ducking through alleys and over rubble. His curiosity pressed him forward, though fear whispered at his shoulder. At the riverbank, the stranger laid the child gently on the cracked stones, speaking softly, encouraging small movements. guiding him with patience. Lior's breath caught as he realized the child's eyes, so full of terror before, now sparkled with trust, however small. The stranger's hands moved with care, wrapping the child in a blanket he had produced from the satchel. He knelt, examining the child's injuries again, murmuring words that seemed to lift something heavier than blood. And then, as if sensing eyes upon him, he looked directly toward Lior's hiding spot. Their gazes met. The stranger's eyes were steady, filled with a quiet certainty that made Lior's chest tighten. "You watch," the stranger said gently, though he did not know Lior's name. "Do not be afraid. What you witness is not danger, it is invitation." Lior swallowed hard, a lump rising in his throat. He felt exposed, unsettled, yet strangely compelled. He could not look away. The city's law was clear. Help, mercy, unguarded compassion, all were dangerous. Yet here was a man giving openly, without concealment, without fear. It was madness. And yet it was beautiful. A guard appeared at the far edge of the bank, stepping from the shadows. His visor reflected the gray river. Stranger did not flinch. The child's small hand clung to his sleeve, but the man did not falter. The guard's voice was sharp. "Stop! Step aside! You violate the code!" The stranger rose slowly, holding the child protectively. "I violate nothing," he said. "I act where none else dare, that is all." The guard hesitated, as if the words themselves carried weight. The child stirred, looking at the man beside him. Lior felt a pang, the stark difference between fear and trust, between survival and care. Finally, the guard waved his men forward, but the stranger stepped backward, merging with the riverbank, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He did not resist, he did not run, yet his presence dominated the space as if the city itself had bent to allow him passage. The child, reassured, stood with trembling legs. The stranger guided him toward the safety of the northern alleys, each step careful, measured. Lior remained hidden, heart-pounding. He felt as if he had glimpsed a different world, one where rules were not always iron, where courage did not wear a mask of cruelty, and where love could exist even in a city that had outlawed it. When the stranger finally disappeared from view, Lior exhaled shakily. He touched his satchel, now feeling the weight of his own collected memories, once fragments of survival, now shadows of a life he had not yet lived. He whispered to the empty street, "What is this madness? What power moves so quietly yet shakes everything in its path?" And somewhere, beyond the gray walls and silent streets, a seed had been planted unseen, but stirring in the dark, waiting for someone brave enough to tend it. For the first time in years, Lior felt the ache of longing. Not for food, not for warmth, not for survival, but for something larger, something unnameable, something worth following even through ash. Chapter 6. Seeds in the dust. The ash had grown thick in Avaris, as if the city itself had given up on trying to breathe. Streets that once carried the chatter of children now groaned under silence. Smoke curled from broken chimneys, carrying the faint, bitter smell of burned wood. Yet beneath the gray, something persistent stirred, though few could notice it, and fewer still dared to believe it mattered. Lior first saw Elian the morning the soil whispered. He had been wandering the northern quarter, trying to organize his small hoard of memories, when a subtle movement caught his eye, a man stooping among the ruins, pressing his hands into the dirt. He stopped, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Elian was planting something, small, delicate seeds buried with care beneath the ashes. His hands were steady, patient. There was no rush, no thought of reward, no care for witnesses. To Lior, it seemed insane. Why plant life in a city that forbade growth, that punished hope? Yet, as he watched, the act struck a chord he could not name. There was dignity here, a quiet rebellion, and perhaps, though he would never admit it, courage beyond survival. Elian straightened and brushed ash from his hands. He looked toward the crumbling skyline, toward the empty streets. "Even here," he said softly, "life can find a way." Lior's breath caught. He wanted to ask why do this? Yet the words stuck in his throat. He felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears pressing against him. Over the next days, he watched from a distance. Elian moved like a shadow of sunlight through the streets, scattering seeds wherever he went. Some fell in the cracks of ruined pavements, others in neglected plots behind collapsed walls. A few were swallowed by the ash entirely. Lior noted them carefully, almost obsessively, as if the act itself demanded attention. At first, nothing came of the effort. The soil rejected the intrusion. Rain, rare and bitter, washed away a few of the smallest sprouts. Even Elian's hands grew raw, his fingers splitting against the stubborn earth. Yet he persisted, patient as the wind. He whispered to the seeds, murmuring words Lior could not hear, words that seemed to carry weight in the air itself. One afternoon, curiosity overpowered caution. Lior approached, staying just at the edge of sight. "You watch too closely," Elian said without turning. "I don't understand," Lior said. Why do this?" Elian paused, standing in the pale gray light. He looked at Lior, eyes calm, unwavering. "Because someone must. Because even a city buried in ash is still soil, and even soil longs to bloom." Lior frowned. "You make it sound easy. It is. The city, the council, the people, they will stop you." "They might," Elian said. "And they might try to scare us, but fear cannot hold back life that wishes to grow." There was a silence then, one heavy with the sound of distant wind through broken streets. Lior felt a tug, a stirring in his chest that made his old cynicism twitch uncomfortably. Could it be possible? Over the following week, Lior began to notice subtle changes in himself. He found himself walking closer to Elian, lingering near the seeds as they were planted. He touched the ash, moved a stone, loosened a patch of dirt, small gestures, almost unnoticed, yet deliberate. Something unnameable guided his hands, a force stronger than fear. One morning, the first sign of life appeared. Tiny green shoots broke the surface of the cracked pavement, trembling as though awakening from a long sleep. Lior froze, staring. He had seen sprouts before in abandoned gardens, but never like this, never so sudden, so alive, so impossibly fragile yet unyielding. Elian knelt beside them. "See," he whispered. "Even the smallest acts, unnoticed and unpraised, can awaken the world." Lior wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. There was wonder in it, raw and unfamiliar, mingled with fear of hope itself. Days passed. More shoots appeared. Tiny blooms pushed through ash and rubble, fragile yet determined. Children who had never known green paused to watch. Some dared to touch the leaves, then pulled their hands back as if they had touched something sacred. Adults frowned, whispered complaints, and shook their heads, but could not stop the creeping greenery. The city's silence began to break. Not with shouts or rebellion, but with whispers. "Have you seen? Something grows, somewhere, even here." And Lior felt a strange shift within him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a world not dictated solely by survival. A world where beauty could exist even in the ruins. He began to help. Slowly, hesitantly, first with the planting, then with care, watering from scraps of melted snow, clearing ash, creating tiny mounds of protection against wind and frost. Each act made him feel both frightened and alive. He could not explain why the work stirred something he had long believed dead. At night, he lay in his small hideaway, hands still smelling of dirt and ash, and replayed the day's events. He felt a pulse beneath his ribs, a whisper in his blood. Life persists. Love persists. And sometimes, in dreams, he saw Elian tending the sprouts in silence, speaking to them in a voice that was both promise and prayer. The green seemed to rise higher in his imagination, reaching through the ash toward the sky. The city, still gray and cold, remained unaware. But life, stubborn and patient, had begun to thread its way back into the streets. For Lior, the act of helping, of touching the soil, of caring for what could be crushed at any moment, became both terror and salvation. He did not yet know the depth of the journey he had begun. He only knew that he could not stop. He could not turn away. And somewhere in the quiet of the city, as ash settled once again on ruined rooftops, Elian planted the last seeds of the day. Brushing his hands free of soil and whispering softly, "Even the smallest gift, given without expectation, can change the world." Lior watched from the shadows, and in the depths of his heart, a question stirred, a question he did not yet dare to voice. Could I too bloom? Chapter 7. The law of the city, the walls of Avaris loomed taller than ever that morning, their dark stones cutting into the ash-heavy sky like jagged teeth. The city had grown accustomed to obedience, each alley and street a silent testimony to survival under the ever-watchful eyes of the council. Rules were etched into life itself. Do not stray, do not hope, do not give. The law was absolute, and fear was its loyal servant. Yet even in a city that prized compliance, whispers of disruption had begun to travel. A single green shoot, no larger than a child's hand, had emerged from the cracked pavement near the riverbank. A seed planted in defiance of law, yet sprouting nonetheless. The council did not act immediately. They observed. They waited. Such things required witnesses, and rumors alone were insufficient. But by the fourth day, word reached the guards. Someone had dared to plant life where none was permitted. Lior, hidden among the ruins of the northern quarter, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had seen it himself, Elian planting, tending, speaking quietly to the soil, and yet he had never imagined the consequences would arrive so swiftly. Elian moved with calm certainty through the streets. He carried no tools beyond the satchel at his side, no weapons, no disguises, just hands, patience, and intent. Each plant, each seed, was an act of rebellion, though it was quiet, almost imperceptible. Lior watched from behind a crumbling wall as two guards appeared, their visors catching the pale light of the ash-filled dawn. They moved cautiously, scanning the streets. Their presence was heavy, deliberate, the embodiment of the law itself. "Are they gone?" one whispered. "Is it safe?" "Nothing is ever safe," the other said. "Do you see the sprouts?" Lior's breath caught. The two men had spotted the first tiny green shoot near the riverbank. It trembled in the chill morning wind, delicate and defiant. Elian knelt beside it. He did not rise or flee. He touched the small leaf, brushing away the ash like a parent brushing dirt from a child's cheek. "Life cannot wait for permission," he murmured. The guards approached cautiously, their boots crunching over broken stones. The first words of the law came then, crisp and unwavering. "You are in violation of the code. Planting life in Avaris is prohibited. Stop or be taken." Elian looked up at them, calm as the river itself. "I do not plant for law or reward," he said. "I plant because it is needed. That is all." The men hesitated. They were trained to enforce compliance, but even they sensed the weight in the words. There was no defiance in tone, no anger, no challenge, only quiet certainty, as if the city itself had sanctioned this act. "Do you not understand?" one said, raising a hand. "The code exists for your protection, for the survival of all. And yet it cannot save the soil," Elian replied softly, "nor the hearts that hope for bloom." Lior felt a pull in his chest. He had spent years measuring survival in ash and fragments. He had learned that life was only what you could claim, only what you could hide. And now, in front of him, a man moved freely, without fear, defying laws meant to imprison both body and spirit. The guards, trained to respond to resistance, were unsure how to act. Their orders were clear: punish disobedience. Their instincts screamed that action was required. But something in the air, in the fragile, tremulous green beneath Elian's fingers, made hesitation possible. Lior stepped forward, instinctively, though he tried to remain hidden. His hands ached to intervene, yet he feared both the law and the strange pull that Elian commanded. "You will stop," the lead guard said, voice louder now, carrying over the square. "The law demands it." "I cannot stop life from seeking the light," Elian said simply. "And I cannot stop tending what has been planted, no matter the cost." The wind rose suddenly, scattering ash across the cracked streets. The green shoots trembled, yet they did not falter. Lior felt the city itself hold its breath. The law, absolute in theory, seemed powerless before a force neither tangible nor violent. "Do you not see?" Elian asked the guards, voice gentle yet firm. "Fear is not the master of what grows. It only delays it. Life moves where courage tends it." The guards exchanged glances. One raised his baton, uncertain, trembling. The other lowered his gaze. The law demanded compliance, yet the act before them, quiet, deliberate, nurturing, seemed to defy the very foundation of their authority. Lior felt something awaken in him. The city, once a cage of ash and stone, seemed to shift subtly beneath his feet. Perhaps he had been wrong to think survival alone was enough. Perhaps there was more, a life that could bloom even in a world that had outlawed hope. Elian began to move, planting another seed in the cracked pavement, ignoring the threats. His hands brushed the dirt with care. Each movement was deliberate, almost prayer-like. Lior's chest tightened with a mixture of fear and awe. The guards hesitated again, then retreated slowly, unsure whether to enforce the law or to respect the quiet defiance they witnessed. Elian continued, undeterred. Hours passed. More seeds were planted. The air seemed lighter, as if breathing itself had become possible once again. Lior helped silently, brushing away ash, loosening soil, carrying water in small containers. Each act made him tremble, not from fear, but from the realization that he was part of something larger, something dangerous and beautiful. By dusk, the first faint shoots had begun to pierce the soil, tiny, fragile, trembling with life. They were small victories, unnoticed by most, yet monumental for those who had the eyes to see. Lior knelt beside one, brushing his fingers over the delicate leaves. He whispered, almost to himself, "It is alive, and I am alive with it." Elian's voice, gentle as twilight, echoed in the quiet street. The law can control bodies. It cannot control life. It cannot govern love. It cannot stop the heart from choosing to give even when the city forbids it. The city slept around them, its walls tall and shadowed. But in the northern quarter, where ash met soil, the first seeds of rebellion had taken root. Not a rebellion of violence, but a rebellion of life. And in Lior's chest, something fragile and profound stirred, the beginning of a transformation that neither law nor fear could contain. By nightfall, the northern quarter gleamed faintly with the promise of green, subtle yet undeniable. The law of the city had not been broken, but it had been challenged in the quietest, most unassailable way, through love, care, and life itself. And Lior, trembling and uncertain, realized with a slow and unstoppable clarity that nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 8. The arrest. The morning light in Avaris had no warmth. It filtered weakly through the ash, casting streets in a haze of gray. The city moved with its usual timidity, heads down, hands clutching tattered coats, eyes avoiding one another, avoiding life itself. But today, the pulse of quiet rebellion ran strong, and it had a name: Elian. Lior watched from the shadows, heart hammering. Elian moved through the streets like a quiet storm, hands brushing the soil, carrying the satchel, planting seeds with deliberate care. Every act, every soft word to the earth was a silent proclamation. We are not finished yet. Do you really think you can get away with this? Lior muttered under his breath, almost angrily at the absurdity of the question. He knew the answer already. Of course Elian could, or at least, he wouldn't be intimidated by fear. And that was the problem. By mid-morning, the council's enforcers arrived. They did not stroll casually. They marched with precision, their boots striking the cracked stone in syncopated authority. Their visors glinted like steel mirrors, reflecting not just the gray sky but the oppressive order they represented. Elian turned to face them, unhurried, unafraid, a wry tilt to his chin that made Lior's stomach tighten. "You're in violation of the code," the lead enforcer said, voice sharp, cold. "All planting is forbidden. All gatherings of potential rebellion are forbidden. You will come with us." Elian raised his hands, slow, graceful, as if to show he bore no weapon, no threat, only intent. "I came to plant life, not to break it," he said. His voice carried, steady as the river despite the guards' intimidating formation. "And yet, if the law punishes caring, I accept the consequence." One enforcer scoffed. "Consequence? This is the law, fool. You have no say in it. You will be removed." "Removed," Elian repeated, almost musically. "From what? The ash, the despair, the lives you pretend to protect while choking them with fear." The sarcasm was sharp, a spark in the gloom. Even the enforcers hesitated. Lior, crouched in the ruins, felt a thrill of incredulity. He had never heard words wielded with such sass and precision, so gentle yet cutting like a blade wrapped in velvet. Elian reached down, brushing dirt from the soil near a tiny shoot. "I plant seeds in defiance, yes, but it is not I who defy. It is life itself, stubborn and audacious, that refuses to bow to the council's fear." Lior wanted to speak, to shout, to join in somehow, but the fear in him was old and well-trained. He remained silent, his chest tight, eyes wide. The enforcers stepped forward. Elian did not move. He allowed them to encircle him without flinching, without a hint of panic. One of them grabbed his arm. Elian let himself be held, still calm, almost playful in the tilt of his shoulders. "You see," he said, voice low but carrying, "I am not angry, I am not afraid. Do you wish to punish me for that?" The enforcer's grip tightened. "You will learn to obey, or the law will teach you one way or another." "Ah," Elian replied, "obedience is overrated. And life," he gestured at the tiny green shoots trembling at their feet, "is completely uncooperative." The enforcers exchanged frustrated glances. They had been trained to quell rebellion, but not sass, not defiance wrapped in quiet laughter, not courage in the form of unyielding calm. Lior felt something strange in his chest, awe, fear, and a swelling ache he didn't recognize. He had always understood fear as survival, yet this was a new dimension. The man standing there, bound for arrest, seemed untouchable in spirit even as his body was threatened. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by whispers and curiosity. They murmured to one another, half in fear, half in disbelief. A child pointed at Elian, eyes wide. "He's not afraid," she whispered. "No," Lior said quietly to himself. "He's something else entirely." The lead enforcer barked a command, and Elian allowed himself to be lifted. He moved with such grace that the act of arrest seemed almost choreographed. He did not struggle, he did not resist. And yet in every tilt of his head, every calm breath, there was a message: I am not defeated. You cannot take this from me. Before being led away, Elian bent slightly toward Lior, eyes locking with his. There was no fear in them, only clarity, kindness, and an almost mischievous defiance. Remember this, he said softly, yet with authority that made the words resonate deep in Lior's bones. Love doesn't end with loss. It begins there. The enforcers moved him toward the city gates, their hold firm but unsteady with the weight of unspoken tension. Lior followed at a distance, compelled despite himself. The green shoots trembled beneath Elian's gaze, as though understanding that their caretaker had been taken, yet they did not falter. The street seemed quieter after his passing, as if the city itself exhaled. Lior lingered, staring at the small sprouts poking through ash and rubble. He felt their stubborn persistence echoing his own inner stirrings. Elian had been removed physically, but his presence lingered, alive in the soil, alive in the hearts of those who had witnessed him. That night, Lior could not sleep. He traced the route Elian had taken, touching the dirt, brushing ash away, whispering to the sprouts in imitation. Each leaf felt like a question, each fragile stem like a challenge. Could life survive when the law sought to suppress it? Could hope endure when fear ruled? He remembered Elian's words over and over. Love doesn't end with loss. It begins there. And for the first time, Lior allowed himself to imagine a future not of mere survival, but of courage, of care, of life pushing stubbornly through the ashes of fear. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city slept under the ash-laden sky. But in the northern quarter, life had begun to whisper, stubborn and audacious. And Lior, crouched beside the trembling shoots, realized with a mixture of awe and terror that he had been irrevocably changed. The stranger was gone, but the gift remained. And it would not be buried. Chapter 9, The Trial. The courthouse, if it could be called that, was a hollowed-out remnant of what once had been a library. Its walls were scorched, the ceilings fractured, and the ash-coated floor reflected years of dust and disuse. Yet the council had decreed it sufficient for the trial, a reminder that law in Avaris was more performance than justice. Lior entered quietly, slipping between the shadows, his eyes fixed on the figure at the center of the hall. Elian knelt, hands resting lightly on the dirt-strewn floor, surrounded by guards whose visors gleamed like shards of ice. The crowd of citizens had gathered, hesitant and murmuring, afraid to show too much curiosity yet unable to resist the pull of this moment. Some had seen the green sprouts, some had heard rumors of Elian's quiet defiance, and others had simply been drawn by the gravity of courage itself. The judge, a man of rigid frame and colder eyes, rose to speak. Elian of the northern quarter, he intoned, his voice echoing through the hollow chamber, you stand accused of violating the code of survival, planting life without authorization, spreading hope without permission, and defying the law of Avaris. How do you plead? Elian lifted his head slowly, his eyes calm, luminous, almost unnervingly serene. I do not plead, he said softly, almost with amusement. I do not resist, and I do not fear your judgment. A ripple ran through the court. Whispers rose, a mixture of confusion and incredulity. Citizens exchanged uneasy glances. Even the guards shifted subtly, unsure how to respond to a man so unflinching. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. You will speak, or we will assume guilt. Elian's gaze swept across the chamber, taking in the broken walls, the ash on the floor, the tentative eyes of the people. If my silence is a crime, then the law has already condemned itself, for the heart cannot be measured by words alone. What is planted in the soil, in courage, in love, these do not require defense. Murmurs rose louder. Some called him mad, some whispered prayers, some simply stared. Lior felt the pull of his own heart, a strange, heavy fluttering, part fear, part awe. Elian's calm was contagious, unsettling, and intoxicating. The council pressed forward, rattling their list of accusations. You have deliberately disobeyed the code. You have nurtured life contrary to the will of the city. You have led citizens to question authority. All these are crimes punishable by removal. Removal, Elian repeated, his voice light but carrying the weight of inevitability, is only for the body. You cannot remove what has been planted in spirit. A hush fell. Lior, crouched near a shattered column, felt the truth of the words settle like rain-soaked ash. Elian's defiance was more than action. It was truth incarnate, and the city's fear trembled at its presence. The judge slammed his gavel against the cracked floor. Silence is not innocence. Speak or be condemned. Elian's lips curved into a faint, almost playful smile. I have spoken, he said, with the soil, with the sprouts, with every act of care that refuses to bow to fear. And yet you ask for more? I speak through life itself. That is my defense. Some of the crowd gasped. Others leaned closer, straining to hear. Lior's own fingers twitched. He wanted to touch Elian, to place his hand over his own heart and feel the courage that radiated from him. But fear still held him. Fear of the law, fear of consequence, fear of hope. The trial stretched long into the day. Witnesses, citizens, and even children were called to recount what they had seen: tiny acts of kindness, green shoots, murmured encouragement, defiance against despair. Every testimony reinforced a reality the council could not suppress. Elian's love had already begun to take root. And yet the council persisted, their voices like the grinding of stone against stone. The code is absolute. No act of mercy or planting or rebellion shall go unpunished. Order must be maintained. Fear must govern the weak. Elian did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply stood when called, nodded when spoken to, and spoke only the truth, that life and love were not bound by the whims of law. By late afternoon, the chamber was tense with unresolved energy. Lior felt the weight of it pressing on his chest, a mixture of despair and hope that made his vision blur. He realized with a strange, aching clarity that the trial was not merely for Elian. It was for the city, for every person present, for the very soul of Avaris itself. Finally, the judge, frustrated and pale, pronounced the verdict. Elian, your actions are in violation. You are to be removed from the city limits. Any further defiance will result in permanent termination of all privileges, including life itself. A murmur spread. Citizens shuffled, some in fear, some in reverent awe. Lior's stomach tightened. Elian's calm, however, did not waver. He inclined his head ever so slightly, acknowledging the judgment without fear or resistance. As he was escorted from the chamber, Elian paused briefly. His eyes found Lior's in the crowd. Do not be afraid, he said softly, a hint of playfulness in the cadence, almost sass in its defiance. You will see that what is planted in love cannot be taken by law nor by fear. And with that, the guards moved him out, their heavy boots echoing through the hollow hall. The city seemed to exhale, the ash lifting slightly as if stirred by unseen wind. Lior remained behind, trembling, staring at the empty space where Elian had stood. Something within him had shifted irreversibly. Fear and cynicism, the companions he had long relied upon, no longer fit neatly around his chest. There was a hollow, growing space filled with possibility. He turned to the small patch of green shoots by the entrance. They trembled in the dying light, fragile yet unyielding, as though they understood their caretaker had been taken but refused to be broken. Lior whispered to them, almost to himself, almost in imitation of Elian. If love can survive the law, perhaps so can we. Chapter 10. The crowd's choice. The morning air in Avaris was heavier than usual, thick with the smell of ash, damp stone, and anticipation. Word of Elian's trial had spread beyond the hollowed courthouse to every alley, every street, every ruined plaza. Rumors had grown into whispers, whispers into discussions, and discussions into tension so palpable that the city itself seemed to hold its breath. The council had declared a choice for the people, a spectacle of morality and obedience. Elian's life, they said, would be weighed against the release of a notorious prisoner, a man who had sown violence and fear across the city for years. His crimes were many, his cruelty known to all. And yet the council offered a trade, a cruel test of collective conscience. Save the guilty or spare the innocent. Citizens gathered in the central square, their faces pale and uncertain. Families clutched one another, children clung to mothers' skirts, eyes wide with confusion and curiosity. They were called to judge, to act, to choose, though every heart trembled with fear. Lior slipped into the crowd, careful to remain unseen, but unable to look away. His gaze was fixed on Elian, who stood calmly in the square's center, hands folded in front, satchel slung lightly over his shoulder. He radiated a calm defiance, almost sassy in its serenity, as if the weight of the city's fear and the council's authority were mere curiosities rather than threats. Elian's eyes scanned the assembly, settling briefly on Lior. In that glance there was reassurance, mischief, and a challenge. Do not let them decide your heart for you. The council stepped forward, the lead judge raising his arms. Citizens of Avaris, he intoned, voice echoing across the square, you are tasked with a grave responsibility. One life will be spared, one life must be claimed. Choose wisely. Decide what you value, security, law and survival, or mercy, hope and love. A hush fell over the crowd. The prisoner, chained and grim, glared at Elian with hate and disbelief. You cannot, he snarled. This is madness, you cannot choose for me. Elian did not respond. He simply stood, serene, letting the tension roll over him like water over stones. His calm, unshakable presence irritated some, inspired others, and unsettled all. Lior felt the weight of responsibility press on him. The council demanded obedience. Fear was their instrument. Yet here was a man, standing quietly, daring the city to act from courage rather than terror. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Do you let the criminal go, or do you spare the stranger? One by one, citizens stepped forward to cast their choice. Each decision was heavy with consequence, yet Elian did not flinch, did not plead, did not argue. His silence was louder than any speech, sharper than any command. A merchant whose shop had been looted by the prisoner hesitated, then cast a vote to release the criminal. I cannot forgive, he muttered, eyes downcast. I must protect what little I have left. A mother, clutching her child, whispered, but he has done nothing to harm us. Her vote saved Elian. Children's voices, timid yet clear, carried through the square. They voted with instinctive courage, perhaps sensing the truth of Elian's presence in a way adults had forgotten. Minutes stretched into hours. The square was alive with murmurs, arguments, stifled cries, and the quiet tension of conscience in motion. Lior's stomach churned with every passing vote. He wanted to scream, to urge them all toward mercy, toward love, but fear rooted him to the spot. And yet he did not need to act. The green sprouts planted quietly in the northern quarter had taught him something unspoken. Love, patience, courage, these forces could move even the hardest hearts. At last, the final votes were tallied. The city had spoken. In a narrow, almost miraculous decision, they chose to release the criminal and spare Elian. The crowd erupted, some in joy, some in disbelief, some in quiet reverence. Elian's lips curved into a small, almost mischievous smile. He bowed slightly, hands still folded, as if the entire ordeal had been expected all along. Well, he murmured under his breath, audible only to Lior, it seems mercy still has admirers. Who would have thought? The council scowled, their authority undermined not by force, but by the collective choice of hearts too stubborn to obey fear alone. Elian's calm had become a mirror, reflecting the inadequacy of law divorced from compassion. The criminal was led away, freed but seething, and the citizens returned to their homes, changed in ways subtle yet profound. In the quiet corners of the square, conversations began about courage, kindness, and the audacity of hope. Lior followed Elian as he turned toward the northern quarter, past streets littered with ash and rubble, past small patches of green trembling in the weak sunlight. He felt something lift in his chest, a spark that had long been buried under cynicism and survival instinct. You see, Elian said softly, his voice carrying just enough sass to tease the weight of the moment, even a city buried in ash can choose life, if only it dares to remember how. Lior smiled, trembling. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be storms, there would be opposition, there would be loss. Yet the seed had been planted not just in soil, but in hearts. As they walked past the trembling shoots, Elian paused and bent slightly to brush ash from the small green leaves. Do not be surprised, he murmured with that playful defiance that made the impossible feel ordinary. If life insists on being stubborn, it is our only chance after all. And in that moment, Lior understood the choice had been made, but the real work was only beginning. Love had been chosen, and with it came the responsibility to nurture it, protect it, and watch it bloom. The city exhaled softly under the ash-laden sky. The trial had ended. The spectacle was over. Yet the consequences, subtle and profound, were only beginning to take root in soil, in hearts, and in the quiet courage of those willing to follow Elian's example. Chapter 11. The execution. The air that morning carried a strange stillness, thick and suffocating, as though the city itself hesitated to witness what was about to unfold. The sky, veiled in ash, seemed heavier, pressing down on the rooftops, alleys, and streets like a gray shroud. Even the wind, usually restless and intrusive, had stilled, holding its breath as the people of Avaris gathered under the council's decree. Elian walked without fear. His steps were slow, measured, almost ceremonial, each one a quiet affirmation that life was not to be dictated by law, by fear, or by the absence of mercy. The satchel swung lightly at his side, a small weight of care and intention, as if to remind the world that even in impending death, life could still be given. Lior trailed behind him, heart pounding so violently that he feared it might betray him. His chest ached, each breath tasting of ash and despair, yet within him burned a fragile, unsteady ember of hope. The streets were lined with citizens, their faces pale and drawn, torn between curiosity, fear, and the quiet recognition that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The execution platform loomed at the far end of the square, a crude structure of blackened timber and iron. It was meant to be a symbol of the council's authority, a place where law triumphed over life, where obedience was enforced through terror. Yet Elian approached it as though walking into a garden, his calm defiance casting a strange glow even through the gray ash. The guards seized him, but their grip was neither harsh nor brutal. They did not need to fight him. He offered no resistance. And yet in the tilt of his head, in the almost imperceptible lift of his shoulders, there was an unmistakable message. You cannot control the heart that has chosen love. Lior's eyes stung. He wanted to cry, to scream, to do something, anything to stop what was coming. And yet, he remained rooted to the ground, a witness to a courage he could barely comprehend. From the shadows of the square, the council observed, their faces tight with irritation and thinly veiled fear. They had anticipated resistance, perhaps outrage, perhaps chaos. What they had not expected was this calm, audacious serenity, a man walking toward death with the certainty of life's persistence. Elian turned his gaze toward the crowd. His eyes, quiet yet penetrating, scanned the citizens who had chosen mercy over fear. They looked back at him with trembling admiration, shame, doubt, and wonder all at once. He raised a hand, a small, almost playful gesture of reassurance. "Do not weep," he said softly, voice carrying over the square. "Do not mourn as though life ends here. What you see as loss is only the beginning." A hush fell. Some citizens' lips trembled. A child dared to step closer, eyes wide with innocence and awe. Elian smiled faintly, a small, almost mischievous tilt of his mouth that spoke of courage beyond comprehension. The executioner, clad in cold, black armor, approached, iron gleaming against the muted light. Elian stood tall, unshaken. When the noose was placed, when the ropes were adjusted, he did not flinch. He did not resist. Instead, he spoke again, softly, almost teasing in the calm confidence of his words. "If life is measured by fear, then none of you have truly lived. But if love can be given freely, then even this moment is a gift." Lior's knees went weak. He wanted to reach for Elian, to shield him from the inevitable. But he could not. All he could do was watch as the man who had taught him that life could bloom even in ash now faced its most brutal test. The crowd leaned forward, hearts clenched. Some prayed silently. Some turned away. Some could not look at all. And still, Elian remained serene, radiant in a quiet defiance that seemed to draw light from somewhere beyond the gray sky. When the moment came, when the council's command was given, Elian closed his eyes briefly. He whispered, almost imperceptibly, as if speaking to the wind, the soil, and the unseen life beneath his feet. "For those who are too broken to bloom, this is for you." And then, as the city held its collective breath, the act was carried out. The silence that followed was deafening. The ash seemed heavier, the air colder, the gray sky darker. Lior felt as though the world itself had paused, grieving the loss yet unable to deny the presence of something transcendent. But then, as night approached, as shadows stretched and deepened, the first faint stirrings of change whispered through the square. Tiny green shoots, planted in defiance, trembled in the dying light. Lior noticed them, barely more than suggestions of life against the ash-strewn ground. He knelt, touching one, brushing away the gray dust with shaking fingers. It was fragile. It was small. But it was undeniable. Elian's voice, carried in memory and in spirit, echoed softly in his mind. "Love does not end with loss. It begins there." Lior sat among the trembling sprouts, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. The city, still heavy with fear and law, seemed impossibly vast and cold. And yet within this moment of despair, a seed had been planted, not in soil alone, but in hearts. Somewhere in the northern quarter, in hidden corners of the city, other sprouts quivered under the ash, quietly, stubbornly, refusing to be defeated. Elian's presence lingered, not as a man, but as a force, a gift, a quiet, audacious challenge to the authority that sought to bind life and love. Lior whispered to the empty air, almost an imitation of Elian's calm defiance. If this is the end, then let it be the beginning. The square emptied slowly, citizens retreating to homes that felt smaller and colder than ever, carrying in their hearts the weight of what they had witnessed. The council believed they had silenced a threat. They had not. For in the silence, in the tremor of green against ash, in the whisper of the wind over the broken streets, a promise lingered. Life, audacious and relentless, would not be contained. And Lior, kneeling among the first sprouts, understood with both awe and terror that he had inherited a responsibility greater than fear. He had inherited the gift. Chapter 12. The storm night fell over Avaris with a weight that seemed almost sentient, pressing down on the city as though mourning what had been taken. The ash that had long settled over streets and rooftops shivered under the wind, restless and uneasy, carrying the scent of earth and smoke and grief. Lior could not sleep. He wandered through the northern quarter, following the paths Elian had walked, tracing the places where tiny green shoots trembled in the cold night. His hands hovered over them, brushing ash lightly from their fragile leaves. The memory of Elian's calm voice, his quiet sass in the face of fear, echoed in every corner of his mind. Love does not end with loss. It begins there. The wind picked up, curling through broken windows, climbing over walls, carrying with it a whisper of something ancient, something uncontainable. It was a storm unlike any other, not merely wind and rain, but the cry of a world stirred by life itself. Lior shivered as lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in stark white flashes. In each flicker he saw the ruins differently, not empty, not lifeless, but alive with possibility. Shadows danced over cracked walls and ash-strewn streets, revealing what had been hidden, the stubborn defiance of sprouts pushing through gray soil, daring to bloom. The first drops of rain fell, not as gentle mercy but as a torrent, drumming against the rooftops, rolling down streets, flooding alleys. Lior raised his face to the sky, letting the cold water soak his hair and clothes, tasting the ash mingled with the rain. His heart thudded with an exhilaration that frightened and thrilled him. Lightning struck near the place where Elian had fallen. The ground shook, dust rose in fleeting clouds, and where his blood had touched the earth, the ash turned dark and soft, rich and alive. Lior fell to his knees, hands pressed against the ground, feeling warmth and pulse beneath the cold drizzle. Life was moving. Something impossible was happening. The storm intensified. Rain lashed against windows and walls, howling through the streets like a living thing, bending trees that had survived the war, tearing loose debris, and yet beneath it all, green shoots trembled, unbroken, resilient. The storm was not punishment, not destruction. It was purification, awakening, a declaration that the city, this wounded, gray, fearful city, was not finished. Lior felt a presence beside him, though no one was there. A whisper, carried in the wind, threaded through the rain. "You understand now," he shivered, tears mixing with the rain. The words were Elian, yet more than his. They were the voice of love itself, audacious and eternal, reaching into the hearts of those willing to listen. The streets of Avaris emptied as the storm raged, but Lior remained, kneeling among the sprouts. He felt the weight of the gift, the enormity of what had been given and the task now entrusted to him. The city had been challenged. Fear had ruled for long enough, and yet in this night of fury, hope had begun to seed itself, unbidden, unrelenting, unstoppable. Thunder rolled across the sky, each echo like a drumbeat of life shaking Lior's chest. The green shoots trembled with each crash, yet they stood. They would not be broken, and in the flashes of lightning, Lior glimpsed the outlines of the city differently. The walls, the ruins, the ashes, all a canvas for renewal. Hours passed, though time seemed suspended. Rain washed the ash from rooftops, from streets, from hearts. When the storm finally abated, Lior rose, soaked, shivering, and yet exhilarated. The first faint light of dawn broke through the clouds, pale and tentative, revealing tiny sprouts of green piercing the darkened soil. He knelt beside them, brushing away the last clumps of ash, and whispered into the silence, "Life begins again." In that moment, Lior felt something shift within himself. Elian's sacrifice was no longer distant, no longer abstract. It lived in the soil. In the rain, in the trembling green shoots, and in the very pulse of the city. What had seemed lost was, in truth, only transformed. The storm had ended, but its echoes remained not in destruction, but in renewal. The ash had been softened, the soil made fertile, and the city, battered yet breathing, had received its first true gift since the long years of fear. And Lior, standing among the trembling sprouts, understood fully that the gift of life once given could not be erased. It was eternal, audacious, and stubbornly defiant. Chapter 13. The bloom the morning after the storm, Avaris awoke to a world both familiar and impossibly new. The ash that had long cloaked the city in gray now lay in softened layers, darkened and fertile by the night's rain. The streets, cracked and war-worn, glistened with droplets that reflected the timid sun. And yet, amid the remnants of ruin, green shoots trembled defiantly through the soil, small, fragile, yet undeniable signs that life refused to be silenced. Lior wandered through the streets, heart pounding with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and exhilaration. Everywhere he looked, he saw the subtle rebellion of life against desolation. Where rubble had lain, tiny leaves pierced the earth. Where dust had choked the cracks, shoots stretched toward the tentative light. The city, once a graveyard of fear, now bore hints of promise. He knelt beside one particularly stubborn sprout, brushing ash from its delicate leaves. It quivered under his touch, but did not break. Lior whispered to it, almost as if it could hear, "You survived. You are the first. Be brave." From the shadows of a nearby doorway, Mara emerged, her eyes reflecting the faint light of dawn and a quiet reverence. She moved slowly, her steps measured yet full of purpose, as though she too felt the weight of what had transpired. "They've begun," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of wonder and solemnity. "Life, it never truly leaves, Lior, not even when the world tries to forget it." Lior looked at her, seeing not just the old woman he had met in the hidden library, but a witness to the audacity of love itself. "It's beautiful," he breathed, though the word felt insufficient. "It's alive," Mara nodded. "It is the gift. What was given cannot be undone. What was planted in sacrifice grows whether the city sees it or not." Together, they walked through the streets, nodding each sprout, each tiny miracle. Lior felt an almost sacred duty awaken within him, a stirring of purpose that had long been dormant beneath the weight of cynicism and survival. This was no longer merely about survival. This was about tending to what Elian had left behind, nurturing hope where none had dared to take root. As he moved, he saw neighbors emerge from doorways, drawn by the faint green against the gray ash. Some approached hesitantly, eyes wide, hands trembling. Mothers shielded their children instinctively, unsure whether to be afraid or amazed. Merchants paused in the ruins of their shops, their faces a mixture of fear, disbelief, and awe. And yet no one could deny it. The sprouts were real. The earth had answered the gift of love with life, and the city, even in its hardened state, could not ignore it. Lior knelt again, planting a handful of seeds from the torn satchel Elian had left behind. He pressed them gently into the softened soil, whispering words of encouragement. Each seed was a promise, each action a defiance of the despair that had long ruled Avaris. As he worked, a small group of children approached, their curiosity braver than caution. "What are you doing?" one asked, eyes wide, fingers brushing a sprout. "I'm planting," Lior said simply, smiling despite the weight in his chest. "Life hope. Love, that's what grows here now." The children nodded solemnly, as though understanding a truth too vast for words. They helped, digging tiny holes, pressing seeds into the soil, their small hands trembling but determined. Lior's heart swelled at their courage. This was the beginning, he realized, not just of growth in soil, but growth in hearts. From the city walls, a few council members watched, their faces tight with irritation and disbelief. They had sought to control, to suppress, to enforce fear as law. And yet the sprouts flourished where no law could reach. The city was awakening, not through decree or punishment, but through audacity, through sacrifice, through love. By midday, more citizens had emerged. Hesitant at first, they approached the green miracles with a mixture of skepticism and wonder. Some knelt beside Lior, others simply observed, unsure whether to touch the trembling life. And yet, the presence of hope was undeniable. The city's gray heart had been pierced, if only slightly, by the audacity of a single, unyielding gift. Lior paused and gazed at the patchwork of sprouts, now small clusters of green swaying gently in the breeze. Each one was a reminder. Life could persist beyond fear, beyond cynicism, beyond death. Elian's sacrifice was no longer distant. It lived in each leaf, each shoot, each trembling proof that the gift had taken root. Mara placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes wet with quiet tears. "Do you see now?" she asked. "Do you understand what has begun?" Lior nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yes," he whispered. "It's more than I ever imagined. It's alive, and it will grow." The city, for all its scars and ash, held its breath as if recognizing a shift. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, its sound broken and hesitant, yet resonant. The sound carried through the streets, over rooftops, through alleyways, a call, a warning, a promise. And in that moment, Lior felt a new certainty take root in his chest, firm and unshakable. He would protect this gift. He would nurture it. He would see it bloom. Not because he had to, not because law demanded it, but because love, audacious, defiant, unstoppable, had chosen him as its steward. The sprouts quivered in the soft sunlight. The city exhaled slowly beneath the ash, and Lior, kneeling among the first green miracles, whispered the truth that had been growing within him. Life does not end here. Not with love, not with sacrifice, not ever. And somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the gray, beyond the grief of the city, Elian's voice seemed to answer softly, playfully, almost sassy in its assurance. It is only the beginning, my friend. Only the beginning. Chapter 14. The memory the first light of dawn slipped quietly over the city, brushing the ruined rooftops of Avaris with pale gold. The air was still cool, tinged with the scent of wet earth and rain-soaked ash. Lior walked through the streets, now faintly alive with trembling green shoots, each step stirring a memory he could neither name nor escape. The city seemed to whisper, as if acknowledging that something had shifted irreversibly, a quiet rebellion of life against death, hope against despair. He reached the northern quarter, where Elian had fallen. The ground, softened by the storm, bore a faint imprint of the man who had walked the city like a spark daring to ignite the darkness. Lior knelt, brushing ash from the soil, and paused. His fingers met something beneath the mud, something unexpected, small and deliberate. A hand-sized bundle wrapped in worn leather, the torn satchel Elian had carried. He pulled it free, brushing away the rain and ash, heart hammering with anticipation and fear. The satchel was light, unassuming, yet it seemed to pulse with intention, as though it carried not just seeds, but the very essence of the man who had given everything. Lior's lips quivered, a mixture of awe, sorrow, and something like wonder tightening in his chest. He opened the satchel carefully, revealing a collection of seeds, each small, fragile, and full of quiet promise. And beneath them, folded neatly, was a note, written in Elian's precise, calm handwriting. For the ones who think they are too broken to bloom. The words struck Lior like a whisper of wind through a desolate alley, sharp, transformative, impossible to ignore. He read them again, slowly, savoring the cadence, the subtle audacity of hope embedded in each letter. Too broken to bloom. How well he knew that weight. How deeply he understood despair. And yet here was a man gone, absent, yet more present than anyone he had ever known, reminding him that brokenness was not the end. Lior sank to the ground, clutching the satchel to his chest. The seeds rustled softly, as though agreeing, as though reminding him that they were alive, waiting for the courage to grow. He laughed softly, a sound tangled with grief and disbelief. "You're full of nerve, you know that," he whispered, addressing Elian as if the man could hear him. Leaving all this, and expecting me to get it right." His laughter trembled into silence as he allowed the weight of the moment to settle. The city around him was still, but it was not lifeless. Tiny shoots poked defiantly through the ash, glimmering wet and green in the first sunlight. Life had returned quietly, stubbornly, audaciously, in the places where Elian had walked, loved, and fallen. Lior's fingers lingered over the seeds, imagining the roots that would one day stretch deep into the soil, the leaves that would reach toward the sky, the blossoms that would defy the memory of ruin. He could almost hear Elian's soft, sassy voice whispering, teasing him. "Do not dawdle, Lior. Life will not wait for your pity party." He smiled through tears, the sound of his own breath catching between grief and determination. "All right," he murmured, standing, satchel in hand. "Let's see if we can't make you proud, old man." The first step was small, almost insignificant. Lior pressed seeds into the softened soil beside a cluster of trembling green shoots. He planted each one deliberately, whispering encouragement to them as if they could feel fear and hope alike. He worked with meticulous care, but there was a playful audacity to it, a defiance that mimicked Elian's own unflinching courage. Hours passed. Lior moved from street to street, planting, tending, brushing ash from leaves, listening to the subtle stirrings of life beneath the rubble. Each sprout he nurtured felt like a conversation with Elian, sometimes teasing, sometimes challenging, always full of quiet insistence that life would not be denied. Citizens, initially hesitant, began to notice. A few stopped to watch, eyes widening at the audacity of a single man planting seeds amid the ruin. Whispers rippled through the streets. Who is this? Why does he care? Can life truly bloom here? Lior smiled faintly at them, holding the satchel close. You want a miracle? He asked no one in particular, voice carrying a subtle sass, a reflection of Elian's own irreverent audacity. Here, your start. Watch carefully. It might be uncomfortable for your fear. Children joined him, tentatively at first, pressing seeds into the wet soil, their small hands trembling but determined. Their laughter, pure and untamed, mingled with the rustle of leaves and the whisper of wind. Lior watched them, heart swelling, realizing that the gift was multiplying not in gold or power, but in courage, in life, in the stubborn defiance of hope. By late afternoon, the northern quarter had transformed. Tiny clusters of green shimmered against the gray ash, a patchwork of miracles that refused to be ignored. Lior stood in the center, exhausted, exhilarated, and trembling with the weight of responsibility. The city could not deny it. Life had returned. Love had returned. Elian's gift was no longer abstract. It had roots, leaves, and the first blush of defiance against despair. Lior opened the note once more, reading the words aloud in the quiet streets. For the ones who think they are too broken to bloom. He let the phrase settle, echoing across the ruins, into the trembling green, into the hearts of those who had watched in secret. And he whispered, a soft, sassy promise to the absent man who had left him this task. I will not fail you. Not now, not ever. The memory of Elian, the gift of the seeds, and the stubborn audacity of life itself had converged. Lior understood, finally, that love did not end in loss. It began in the moments when the world seemed least deserving, when fear reigned, when cynicism ruled, when everything appeared broken. And in that understanding, in that quiet, heart-gripping realization, the city itself seemed to inhale, readying itself for the next chapter of life, for the first blush of hope, for the bloom that would never truly end. Chapter 15. The awakening. The city of Avaris held its breath, as if unsure whether it dared to hope. The streets, still mottled with ash and the remnants of storm, bore quiet evidence of life, clusters of green trembling stubbornly in defiance of ruin. Lior carried Elian's satchel close, its worn leather familiar and comforting against his chest. Each seed inside was a spark, a reminder that love, once given, refused to be contained. He moved swiftly through the northern quarter, then deeper into streets less traveled, where the shadow of destruction hung heaviest. His hands were steady, though his heart raced, pounding with the audacity of what he was about to do. He pressed seeds into the softened soil, murmuring encouragement to them as if they could hear the very heartbeat of the city. You've got this, he whispered to the tiny green shoots. Grow, damn it! Show them what defiance looks like. The words felt audacious even to him, yet he smiled. They carried a piece of Elian's irreverent courage, a quiet challenge to fear itself. At first, the streets were silent, save for the rustle of leaves and the occasional drip of rain lingering from the storm. Then, from doorways and alleyways, cautious eyes began to peek. One by one, citizens emerged, drawn by curiosity, disbelief, and a whisper of something they had not felt in years, hope. A woman stepped forward, wringing her hands nervously. What are you doing? She asked, voice tight. This won't last. The council will destroy it. Lior looked at her, satchel in hand, and smirked faintly, a touch of Elian's sass in his expression. Destroy it, maybe, but I'm betting they can't destroy life. It tends to have a mind of its own, you know. She blinked, startled by his confidence. And yet something in her stirred a faint, almost forgotten desire to believe. Children began to emerge, curiosity braver than caution. They watched Lior plant seeds, their small hands itching to help. Can we? One asked timidly, eyes wide. Absolutely, Lior said, crouching to their level. Plant like nobody's watching. Grow like the world isn't trying to stop you. That's how we do it here. They laughed, tentative at first, then with uncontainable joy pressing seeds into the softened soil. Lior guided them, offering encouragement, teasing them with playful warnings. Don't squish the sprouts. They're delicate, just like hope. Treat them better than the council treats rules. Across the city, more people began to notice. Windows creaked open, doors eased ajar, and citizens stepped hesitantly into the streets, drawn by whispers of green trembling against gray. Lior moved among them, planting, teaching, laughing, and occasionally muttering to the satchel. You're lucky I like responsibility. Otherwise, this whole mission would be buried in the dirt by now. It was impossible to ignore. Hope was contagious. The city's gray heart trembled as though it recognized the audacity of life daring to bloom. Ash-streaked walls bore witness to small miracles, green shoots pushing stubbornly toward the light, each one a subtle defiance of the fear that had ruled for so long. By midday, Lior found himself in the central square, satchel nearly empty, hands and sleeves streaked with soil, face flushed with exertion and exhilaration. Around him, citizens worked quietly at first, then with growing confidence, pressing seeds into the earth, brushing ash from trembling leaves, whispering encouragement. Some adults laughed shyly for the first time in years. Some children danced between clusters of sprouts, marveling at life against ruin. A council official appeared, watching from the steps of a collapsed building. Her face was tight, disbelief etched deep into her features. This is forbidden," she spat, voice trembling. "You have no authority," Lior raised a hand, smiling faintly. "Authority, that's not what this is about. This is about life, love, hope, and guess what? Neither of them asked permission." The official's glare faltered as she looked at the trembling green sprouts, at the citizens now planting alongside Lior, at the children laughing and dancing. Something in her, buried under years of fear and obedience, stirred. She turned and walked away, jaw tight, perhaps unsure whether to be angry or amazed. By evening, the northern quarter and central square were dotted with trembling green, small clusters of defiance against despair. Lior stood amidst them, breathing heavily, satchel finally empty. He surveyed the streets, awed and terrified by the task he had inherited, by the life that now pulsed in every corner, every crack, every shadow. Mara appeared, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight and the glimmer of miracles. "You've done more than plant seeds, Lior," she said softly. "You've awakened the city." He shook his head, smiling through exhaustion and awe. "No," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Elian did, I just made sure the gift kept moving. I'm just the messenger." She smiled knowingly. A messenger can be dangerous, indeed, especially when the message refuses to be ignored. Lior chuckled, brushing ash and soil from his sleeves. "Well, I suppose audacity runs in the family now, doesn't it?" The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the streets in gold and crimson. The green shoots trembled in the twilight, resilient and unbroken. The city exhaled a long, quiet breath, as if feeling for the first time that hope might not be forbidden, that life might not be over, that love could still take root. And Lior, standing among the sprouts, feeling exhaustion, exhilaration, and awe all at once, whispered softly to the empty streets, to the memory of Elian, to the city itself. "Keep growing. Keep fighting. Keep believing. This is only the beginning." Somewhere, carried by the wind through shattered rooftops and cracked walls, Lior thought he heard Elian's voice, teasing, playful, audacious. "Well done, kid. You're getting the hang of it. Don't dawdle now, life waits for no one." And for the first time, Lior laughed fully, unrestrained, letting hope flood the streets, the hearts, the broken city. Chapter 16. The rebellion of light the morning broke over Avaris with a quiet, almost defiant brilliance. The city, long suffocated under ash and fear, stirred beneath the touch of dawn. Lior moved through the streets, now dotted with trembling green shoots that had begun to swell with audacity. The air smell,